Hello and welcome to another Cash and Sport podcast. In this episode, we spoke to Luxolo September, or Lux, as some of you may know him. Lux is the head of broadcasting and TV at the Confederation for African Football, or CAF. In this podcast, we spoke about the recently released financial results, which show a 17% increase in revenue. We spoke about the possible funding of the Super League, which is coming up, rumors around Saudi Arabia and their funding of CAF. We spoke about the general state of African football from a commercial point of view. So let's get into it. Luxolo September, thank you so much for joining me today. How's CAF? How's Egypt?
Yeah, I arrived here last night. I feel like I'm a stranger here in Cairo. I actually think about it that, in 2023, I've spent maybe not more than 4 weekends here, 4 or 5 weekends. So, Cairo is exceptionally hot today. It's about 40 degrees. So when you complain about the heat, you must know that, when you complain about the cold in South Africa, you must get a little bit of our heat.
Oh, well, you should be in the heat. You're in a hot seat now at CAF. Broadcast rights and commercialization of CAF. Firstly, before we get into our discussion around the CAF finances, how have you found your time in this new hot role?
Challenging, exceptionally challenging, very difficult. Probably the most challenging role from a workload point of view, and also maybe for the fact that where we found CAF, I think 2 years ago, it's an open secret that this place was in a very bad shape. We had underleveraged rights all across the board. We were struggling. We were in the red actually. I think $140 million in the hole. TV rights all over the place, and commercial agreements that were like literally a lot of issues in that space. So I think the first year was just the most difficult period. I hardly slept. I gained a lot of weight, lost a lot of hair, but it's been probably the most challenging yet the most exciting role I've ever had in my life, because there's a lot of learning as well, a lot of unlearning. I always tell my friends that my first job in TV rights, I was carrying someone's bag maybe about 12 years ago. I used to carry Peter Mensah's bag whenever he goes to TV meetings, and then he let me organize broadcast meetings. This is about 12 years ago, I think. But that was easy stuff because you're literally carrying someone's bags, and now it's a heavy load of responsibilities for you. But I think it's an exciting period.
Yeah, it's a whole new ballgame in it, and you're right. We'll get into why it's exciting, but for context, for those who are uninitiated on CAF and the financial situation, there was the agreement with Lagardère, who were a French middleman, and they were essentially tasked with the task of distributing rights, broadcast rights, in a deal with over $1 billion. That agreement then gets cancelled because of complaints within the courts of Egypt, and it's now shelved, and CAF essentially still had to carry the can of paying for that, which, if I'm not mistaken, you just about finished paying, or you're on the way to finishing paying for that. And then there's COVID, 2019-20, which hits and leaves CAF in a financial hole of, if I'm not mistaken, roughly about 40-something million in 2021. It was more than that in 2020, and a very difficult situation. Now that you've come in, how would you just essentially described what you found, but am I right in saying that was the state? And if in our conversations prior to this, we mentioned before that CAF was basically in financial ICU. Would you summarize it as ICU? Was it really that bad?
I think for the last 2 years we've been in an ICU. Maybe for the last 6 years, African football has been in an ICU. It has not left the ICU ward whatsoever. And now we just went into a general ward. But I think everything is about leadership. Everything is about leadership in life. When you've got the right leaders, it's like the importance of oxygen when you're climbing Mount Everest. You see, the higher you go, the more you need oxygen, the right type of leaders. CAF is exceptionally lucky. I'm not just saying this because he's my boss. They are exceptionally lucky to have someone like Dr. Motsepe leading CAF, an exceptional human being, a person who demands, I mean, people sometimes make jokes about him, and I tell them, listen, working for him is probably one of the toughest things because you work 24/7, literally. There is no Sunday with him. There is no 1:00 a.m. With him. Now, if you have someone like that who is single-minded, who's focused, who's got a track record of turning things around, even if you are tasked with a very difficult responsibility, you've got some sort of cushion, you've got some sort of confidence that the person who's leading us, the pilot, knows what he's doing. So let's take care of our little areas and ensure that it's as organized as possible, put the right structures to support the bigger goal. When he came in as a president of CAF, I actually remember the incident. This is maybe 3 months before we both came in at CAF. We met at Hyde Park, me and him. And we ended up sitting down. I mean, I will tell the story, I'm sure, one day when I tell the story of what happened in those interesting months. The only question I asked him is like, why would you go there? I guess it's the same question I should have asked myself when I came. But we had challenges. We had big problems commercially. We had big challenges reputationally. We had big challenges from a credibility point of view, the gap between us and the commercial world. I don't necessarily want to talk about what happened with Lagardère because you know that there was a settlement between CAF and Lagardère. It's common cause now. And we've closed that chapter now. We're moving forward. I think the whole idea...
Just before we move on, so you're confirming that the Lagardère element is now done. It's been settled in the most recent financial statements, right?
We've reached an agreement. We reached an agreement with Lagardère, an amicable agreement. I don't think neither of the parties has kind of made a full disclosure about all the terms of it. Right. I think it's public knowledge. We have spoken about it. We released a media statement about it. It's in the past now. We are looking forward to creating a new path for African football, to creating new partnerships for African football, and consolidating the partnerships we have.
Right. So let's get into the most recent financial results. Right. The point of CAF wheeling itself out of ICU and being put into a general award. 17% increase in revenue. 25% increase in prize money, broadcast agreements, which is now your remit, have also improved, and sponsorship income has also improved. So give us a little bit of an overview of what the numbers look like. I know we haven't really seen the financial statements themselves, but take us through what got CAF to this point. How did you get to this point of a 17% increase in revenue?
I think the first principle I need to say is that the money of football is going back to football. And that's what we know for a fact. Now, that's the first thing. The second thing, 2 years ago, we actually put a lot of stringent financial measures in order we needed to close the leaks, because you can't talk about the long term if the short term is threatened, is under threat. So we needed to take care of the short term first, where we were leaking money, what were the biggest challenges, what we needed to mitigate in the short term to ensure that there is stability. Now, I think about a couple of months ago, we reached a level of stability. Now we needed to rebuild. How can we rebuild? Put confidence back. That's why you will see that the sponsorship revenue has increased by 17%. Well, media rights and sponsorship revenue. Now, that's not by miracle, It's because we are repackaging our product. If you look at the TV product of CAF today, it's radically different to what it has been in the past. We are putting a lot of investment there. The byproduct of this is that the African football content is now becoming an appetizing and also commercially viable product to a lot of people. So all these things are not accidental. They are because we are thinking about it. We're looking at the problem. We're looking at how we can actually resolve the problem. Now, the president of CAF made some interesting statements the other day. He always says his overarching dream is to make African football globally competitive and self-sustaining. Now, it can't just be slogans. There must be some sort of action that supports this. The first step was improving prize money. I mean, with AFCON, 40%. Women's AFCON, 150%. Women's Champions League, literally, we started from scratch to give them their money. CHAN, 20%. And Champions League, 20%. Now, All these things are ensuring that the football at a base level can start to sustain itself. Now we're breathing confidence. What we are doing is that we're investing in the product so that the product can be able to attract best talent, can be able to package better. And the results is that people who are investing are going to invest more in the product. So that's basically some of the principles that we have taken in the last couple of months. Again, it's the leadership of Dr. Patrice Motsepe, Veron Mosengo Omba, who's the Secretary General. These are the people who are leading the executive committee of CAF. And us as generals, the people who are heading different departments. And I think one of the toughest jobs is obviously the sales department,
Right. So there will be people out there, and I'm going to ask the question because they will ask the question. Where did the money come from to be able to increase the broadcast, the tournament fees across all of the competitions, et cetera, et cetera? I would assume that the money would have come from broadcast rights because we saw the agreements that you signed with the recent AFCON and so on and so on. Is that where the money came from, or were there different sources? Because there are rumors in the air and so on about Saudi Arabian money, et cetera, et cetera. So where did the money come from?
Yeah, very good question. I think let me just tackle your last question. I mean, I have to tell you, the agreement between CAF and Saudi Arabia, not agreement, the MOU, was only signed maybe 2 months ago, and not even a single cent has exchanged hands between anyone. Actually, there is, at the moment as things stand right now, there's not a single cent that has been discussed commercially. We did release the details of what the MOU is about. I think there's almost a, I don't want to say I resent this, but it happens whenever us as Africans are we're discussing a certain path that we want to take. Everyone almost wants to say they are doing this because they're being told by this one. First it was Europe is telling them, now Saudi Arabia is doing this. Not a cent that has come from Saudi Arabia to CAF as things stand. Right. Again, you will see our financial statements that the increase in revenues that we have actually managed, both from the TV rights, mainly from the TV rights, and also from the sponsorship, has ensured that at least there is money that is in the bank that we can be able to reinvest in the product. Now, the big difference is that, again, I said to you earlier, money of football is going back to football. The pot, of course, is getting a bit bigger because there is more investment. I think the numbers that are going to go, I think this upcoming AFCON, by the way, in Cote d'Ivoire, is going to surprise a lot of people in how it's going to perform commercially. I see some indicators in front of me, but I'm not at liberty to discuss those things at the moment until a certain period. So the indications are there.
So some people will ask, okay, practically there was the agreement with SuperSport. Well, previously there was a middleman who would distribute the rights for you. Now that's held internally within CAF.
We negotiated all the rights the previous cycle ourselves, right? There was no one else who was involving. And not just SuperSport, there are many other, you've got Bain Sport, you've got Canal, you've got many other, Star Times, you've got BBC Sky, TRT, Discovery, Global. The list is long. Sports Club, Discovery Italy, all these other guys, AUB with all the 30 plus countries in Africa. So all these deals were done by CAF directly. This means that, we didn't have to pay any commission to anybody else. The money that actually ended up, and also not including me, the money ended up in African football.
Right. Okay. Now you're in the general award. The projections for CAF in terms of how long will it take for CAF to get to a point where you're no longer in the hospital, you've been discharged, CAF is now flying and doing well financially. What does that look like? And is I know there's been a change of name, but is the new major competition launching in October the magic pill to get you to a point of being discharged from this general ward and hospital?
I think I just want to go back to the last point you made about the investment. I mean, you looked at our investment patterns throughout. Not only are we keeping money, we are reinvesting in the game. I mean, the money we're spending in development went from $18 million to $24 million. The money we're spending in women's football, the money we're spending in school sport. I mean, here we must thank the Motsepe Foundation, who have invested $10 million of their money to schools football in Africa. Now, there is a huge cash outflow that is going directly into direct investment of products or events at CAF to improve the standard, how it looks, how it's presented, and how it's performing in the long term. Now, we are quite confident because now we are in the cycle of renegotiating some of the rights, which includes TV rights, which includes sponsorship rights, which includes a new couple of other partners that are coming up in the next few weeks that are going to bring a huge financial investment in African football in the next couple of weeks, Now, all these things are obviously part of the projections for the AFCON 2023 that is coming up in Cote d'Ivoire. The Super League is obviously a side project. What you must realize is this. CAF, when we arrived, had certain agreements that were existing. And some of them short-term, some of them long-term. Now, you cannot do anything about long-term agreements. There's nothing you can do about them. Now, you are put in a situation whereby you can either wait them through or you can come up with new products in the system that are going to bring new cash injection that is going to create some diversify your income streams. Now, I know everybody else is quite semantics about whether it's called Super League or whatever it is. For me, it's not about Super League. It's not about African Football League. It's about how we can create new revenue streams that are going to support our long-term ambitions, mid to long-term ambitions. That is making African football commercially sustainable. Now, if you have got $10 right now and your current $100, if you've got your current agreements up to $100, now you know that your expenditure is $120. You can no longer live on credit card. You no longer want to live on credit card of $20. You've got to create a product that is going to bring an extra revenue stream that is going to close the $20 and ensure that not only are you bringing even, you're able to bring more cash flow that is going to sustain you in the long term. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. But I'm still going to push you on this.
I think Nqobile, also people get quite they got a bit sentimental.
Right.
For example, I hear people would say, yeah, but it was a bad idea for Europe. I actually have a different theory of why
I will be
want it.
Before we continue, I will be very open and say I don't have an issue with different competitions and even if it's a Super League or whatever competition it is, as long as firstly, because we just recently did a review on the cost of participating in CAF competition, and
I saw
for the
very good.
Thank you. And generally, for the most part, it's very difficult for teams to be able to compete because Africa is a massive continent. They have to fly all over the place. It's very difficult. The rumors that we've seen, and we don't know whether they're correct, in that there will be regional breakdowns, etc., that's still going to come. But at the end of the day, African football needs ways to be financially viable and to also make it worthwhile for teams to participate in competitions. So whether it's a Super League or whatever competition it is, yes, it needs to ensure that other competitions, whether they're there or not, survive and they thrive. But at the end of the day, it needs to elevate the standard of African football. So on this platform, there's no issue with regards to whether it's a Super League or whatever it is. But the question has been, what happens to other competitions and who gets into this competition, or, does it become an exclusive big boys club? And I guess maybe that's a question I can put to you.
I think, first of all, you must know that my background is in league football.
Right.
In league football. So I spent a decade working in league football. So I understand league football very well. I've got a basic understanding of league football. And I'm also of the view that the survival of football in the long term depends on strong competitive leagues, domestically first.
Right.
Because once they are strong and domestically and financially sound domestically, they're able to attract the fan base, they're able to create a good product in their own countries, and there is a support base for them as almost a launching board for continental championships. It cannot be the other way around, you know? So there are a lot of fears somewhere that somehow there will be a situation whereby there will just be continental football. I'm a league man. I understand the leagues. They are very, very important in the ecosystem. Now, what needs to happen is the ongoing discussions that are happening on the calendar, the matches, the blocks, how we are going to, because the whole discussion has to be about a win-win situation. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of compromises that have to be made along the way. We're all working towards one goal. I'm 100% sure about this. African football is united in its clear idea that we have to create a future for ourselves. We might differ on how we want to do it. Right. And sometimes people confuse the fact that we differ on the implementation with saying there are differences with African football in the vision of where we're going. I think there is a clear vision for everyone. The person who's sitting in South Africa and the person who's sitting in Morocco share the same goals of how and where we should go. Maybe we might differ in how we should move forward in that. Now, it goes back to the point you just raised. When we introduce the African Super League, when we introduce new competitions, I don't think this could be at the expense of existing domestic competitions in their respective countries. That should not happen, and it will not happen. Now, what will happen is that there will be a lot of discussions, because you saw the president of you might have heard, at the General Assembly, he mentioned the issue that we are now going to have an organized structure for the leagues, whereby the CAF can be able to sit down with an equivalent of European Club Association, ECA, in Africa, whereby amongst ourselves, we discuss our interest and we are able to find a workable solution going forward. This, to me, is in the interest of everybody else. And I think African football is still under-leveraged. We should not fight about small issues. We should keep our eyes on the bigger picture for us to go forward.
No, absolutely. And you make a good point around the fact that leagues haven't had a central and united agenda which they're fighting towards. And it's only happening now that this body or this organization is being put together. The last question on this issue. The president mentioned, the initial reports were around a certain amount of money, which has now been reduced towards that competition. Is there financial reserves in order to be able to finance this competition, or will that still be, because you mentioned and I think you mentioned it, because there's something coming. Is something coming which, in terms of sponsorship or something to that effect, which will essentially enable CAF to finance this competition?
I think at the right time, CAF and the African Super League structure that is running the competition will announce all those details. Let us not steal the thunder from them and so forth. I don't want to get involved in all the discussions about the financial and the commercial model of that stage. My job right now is still to sell the AFCON and making sure that I make as much money as possible for African football. Right. What is important, though, is to note that there's going to be a lot of consultation still. There's an ongoing process of consultation about this issue of how leagues are going to be structured, what will be the revenue share between the CAF, between the member association, between the clubs and everyone else. And I think at the right time, we will announce between all of us, the parties that are involved in these structures. I think it's important for us to keep our eye on the most important things. And the most important thing is to have a financially stable Africa. It's to be able to increase our revenue pool, is to be able to sustain ourselves, and is to be able, how we get into that, Nqobile, is an ongoing process of discussion.
Okay, I've hammered you on and on about this issue. Let's move on. We have 4 teams currently participating at the Women's World Cup. They haven't gotten underway yet, but they will this weekend. Of those 4 teams, only one of those teams in Morocco is able to, within their domestic leagues, only one of those 4 teams players have a standard set salary, which is paid for by the Royal Morocco Federation. The other 3 countries are not sponsored. They, apart from South Africa, which is sponsored by SASL, there's no minimum wage, etc., etc. All the teams participating in CAF competition have been told that they have to have a women's team. In your view, and maybe slightly aside from your job in broadcasting, why is it that there doesn't seem to be a view from within the teams and federations that, you know, there's value in women's football, and why does it have to be forced? I know CAF is doing a lot in terms of the report that you put out recently this year, speaking about the state of women's football, and it didn't make for good reading. But it seems to us that federations and teams have to be forced into a position. Why are they not on their own coming on board and saying, we'll invest in women's football because we see value and we can recoup whatever we put into it at a later stage?
I think that's fundamentally unfair, you know, the generalization is not necessarily accurate. I think there is a clear interest majority. I'm sure there might be some who have a different backward view about how this thing should go forward, but I think there is a clear appetite for most people I've met, most clubs I've met, most federations I've met, to advance women's football. I think it's actually a societal problem. It's not a football question that we must have. If you look at the commercial rights of women's football, now you can't point a finger at associations and clubs when, if you go to a certain bank or a certain sponsor, when they are giving men's football, they will give them $10. They're giving women's football, they're giving them $1. Now there's a commercial reality that we need to close. There is a bigger societal question that we need to face, which has nothing to do with football. Of course, football happens just to be the mirror of society. There is a bigger conversation we need to talk about, because in 2023, we should not be talking about equality in pay and all those other things. We should actually talk about how we can improve salaries of women's football players. But the objective reality is that people like myself and others must be able to sell the products. Now, there's a hypocrisy which must also be removed in the media. Nyana Banyana is playing in the World Cup. I read South African media quite a lot. I don't see the thing in clear back pages or the front pages, the players being profiled, given a name. The same people are actually criticizing the clubs for not doing much, yet they're not giving them the commercial value. You see? So, again, I go back, it's not just a football question. I just made an example to you about the media right now. Go to the Sunday Times, City Press, Sunday World, Star, and all those other places. Check consistently in the last 2 weeks. Have you seen players being given profiles in the back page and the front pages? No.
Right. And you make a good point. It can't only be from a club perspective or from a team perspective that work is done. If we're going to give a profile or speak to a sports person, it must be either male or female. There can't be a selective view of how these things are reported. And like, before we wrap up, 5 years from now, possibly you're still at CAF, possibly that's it. No. 5 years from now, where does CAF sit in terms of the global game and its stature in that conversation? From a commercial point of view, this is
AFCON, in the next 2 AFCONs, will be the most commercially valuable asset, if not amongst the top 4 globally. I guarantee you. African football will at least be able, in the next 4 to 5 years, to start paying for its bills. That's very important. I think for us, we don't exist just to declare profits for vanity. We exist to create revenue streams to support the programs of football. That's our primary job. Now, we're not necessarily going to come to your show every year and talk about great profits. if the center is not holding. The center has to hold. Unfortunately, we have a business, and we have a football fan who's a businessman at the helm. He keeps his eye on the balance sheet. He keeps his eye on the football side of football. So that actually helps. I think in the near future, our club competition is going to be commercially strong, but the African Cup of Nations, both men and women, Total Energies African Cup of Nations, is going to be a great asset commercially, globally.
Right. Thank you so much, Lux. And you sure we can't ask you who these new sponsors are? Just a little bit of a tidbit of information for this platform.
I tell you what, I've been fortunate that I've been involved in a lot of discussions in the last year or two with a lot of people. I'm very, very excited by but particularly two of the big brands that are joining us in the near future. I'm very, very excited about them because I think they're going to be a game changer in how African football is viewed globally. And it's a pity I can't tell you, because if I tell you, I gotta kill you, and I don't necessarily want to commit murder. So it's the whole idea. We have to keep the excitement and the conversations, and hopefully in the near future, whether we are no longer here, or would have laid a foundation for African football to stand on its own, and will have redefined the rules and ensure that we get the respect, man. No one respects you if you go and beg, Nqobile. Nobody respects you if you go and beg. You must create your own revenue. You must walk in your room as equals. That's what we want to achieve for ourselves, for our people. And I'm sure this is actually only a reasonable request and ambition.
Luxolo September, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today and being so open and frank around the state of African football, the state of CAF. I look forward to the announcements around these new partners that are coming on board. And congratulations on delivering a stellar set of results. Hopefully the hospital smile isn't too bad and it gets better, over the next few years.
We don't like hospital food. We want to be out there very soon. And I think the future of African football is bright. The progress that we are making is soon going to be irreversible. So thank you very much for the platform. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Together, we must build the Africa we want, because our future is intertwined. Our future is one.
Our future is Africa.